The grand chamber of the Galactic Council stretched impossibly wide, its crystalline dome displaying the swirling nebulae of the architect's crown as a reminder of the cosmic scale that these deliberations supposedly represented. 12 species sat in their designated sections, their representatives arranged in tiers that seemed designed to diminish whatever delegation had the misfortune of standing before them. Today, that misfortune belonged to humanity. Ambassador Elena Vasquez stood alone on the obsidian dais at the center of the chamber, surrounded by beings who had traveled the stars when her species was still painting on cave walls. She kept her spine straight, her expression neutral, and her hands clasped behind her back in a posture that hid the slight trembling of her fingers. The Varathi speaker unfolded his massive frame, his chitinous exoskeleton clicking as 4 arms gestured expansively. "The Council has deliberated," he announced, his voice carrying through the translation matrices embedded in every surface. "The matter of humanity's continued expansion into the Meridian sector has been reviewed in accordance with the Galactic Accord's 3rd revision." Elena said nothing. She had learned that lesson in her first decade of service. The Council despised interruption, and they despised eagerness even more. "The expansion violates 17 separate territorial agreements," the Varathi continued. "The resource extraction from the Kepler systems constitutes theft from the collective resource pool. The military installations on human colony worlds exceed defensive parameters by a factor of 3. And the unauthorized development of faster-than-light technologies threatens the stability of established trade routes." The Luminari delegate flickered in shades of angry orange, her gaseous form rippling within its containment field. "We agreed to tolerate humanity's existence within the boundaries established by the First Contact Protocols. We did not agree to watch you breed and spread like a virus across space that was never yours." Elena let the insult wash over her. 23 years as a diplomat had given her an immunity to such barbs, though she noted it in her mental ledger. The Luminari had always been the most openly hostile to human integration. The Kethvari representative, a towering figure wrapped in ceremonial robes that hid its serpentine lower half, leaned forward on its coiled base. "We have been patient, Ambassador Vasquez. When humanity first emerged from its singular world, we welcomed you. We shared technology. We offered protection from the predatory species that would have consumed you before you learned to defend yourselves." "And in exchange," Elena replied carefully, "humanity has provided laborers for the consortium's mining operations, soldiers for the peacekeeping fleets, and researchers whose innovations have benefited every species in this chamber." "Benefits that pale against your transgressions," the Varathi speaker countered. "The Council has reached a unanimous decision." Elena's stomach tightened. Unanimous decisions were rare. Unanimous decisions regarding humanity were unprecedented. "The Terran Coalition will immediately halt all expansion beyond its current borders. All military installations in excess of defensive parameters will be dismantled within 1 standard cycle. All unauthorized FTL research will be surrendered to the Council's Science Directorate. Human population growth will be regulated to ensure no further strain on galactic resources." The words hung in the air, their implications crystallizing slowly in Elena's mind. Population regulation. They were demanding the right to decide how many humans could be born. "And if the Terran Coalition declines these terms?" she asked, her voice steadier than she felt. The Vorathi speaker's mandibles spread in what might have been amusement. Then the Council will be forced to correct the mistake it made 2 centuries ago when it chose to spare your species rather than quarantine it. The threat was unmistakable. War. Extinction. The same fate that had befallen the Draxori when they had defied the Council 3,000 years ago. Their homeworld sterilized, their colonies scattered and absorbed, their very genome archived and forgotten in the vaults of the Science Directorate. Elena drew a slow breath. I will relay the Council's decision to the coalition government. You have 1 standard rotation, the Luminary delegate said, her form pulsing with smug satisfaction. After that, the Council's enforcement fleets will begin their advance. History has shown that negotiation with your kind requires motivation. The ambassador nodded once, turned, and walked from the chamber with measured steps. She did not run, she did not stumble, she did not let them see anything but calm acceptance. Only when the doors sealed behind her did she allow herself to exhale. The shuttle ride back to the human embassy compound took 17 minutes. Elena spent every one of them composing the message that would change everything. Her aide, a young man named Marcus Chen, who had shown remarkable aptitude for surviving the political minefield of Galactic Council politics, met her at the landing pad with a secured tablet. I've already received preliminary reports from our intelligence assets, he said quietly as they walked. The enforcement fleet has been mobilizing for the past 3 cycles. They weren't waiting for a response, Ambassador. They've been preparing for war. Elena nodded. She had suspected as much. The Council's ultimatum had been too perfectly prepared, too smoothly delivered. This wasn't a diplomatic gambit. It was the opening move of an offensive that had been planned for years. Get me Admiral Chen, she said. Encrypted channel, priority alpha. Your father? The commander of the 1st Defense Fleet, Marcus. Family considerations are secondary. The young man wisely said nothing more as they entered the embassy. The facility was modest by Council standards, a reminder that humanity was still considered a junior member of the galactic community. But its communication systems were state-of-the-art, upgraded in secret over the past decade by engineers who understood that the day would come when speed of information would mean the difference between survival and extinction. The holographic display flickered to life, and the weathered face of Admiral William Chen appeared, his expression already grim. I've heard, he said before Elena could speak. We have assets on every Council world. The ultimatum was broadcast to their civilian populations an hour before it was delivered to you. They're selling this as a humanitarian intervention. They're selling our subjugation as a mercy, Elena corrected. Population regulation. They want to breed us down to numbers they can control. I've already begun mobilization, but we need the Prime Minister's authorization for full military deployment. The Admiral's eyes were hard, but Elena saw something else there, something that hadn't been present in the decades of previous conversations about Council relations. Hope. That's why I'm calling, she said. I need to speak with the full coalition cabinet within the hour. They're assembling now. The Council's ultimatum was a surprise, but not an unexpected one. The protocols we've been developing, they're ready. Elena closed her eyes for a moment, allowing herself to feel the weight of what was about to happen. When she opened them, her voice was steady. Then it's time to stop pretending we're the species they think we are. Part 2. The Truth Behind the Mask. The coalition cabinet convened in the secure conference room buried 3 kilometers beneath the surface of Mars, in a facility that officially did not exist.
The room was sparse. A rectangular table, 12 chairs, walls lined with displays that showed real-time strategic data from every human settlement in the galaxy. Prime Minister Sarah Okonkwo sat at the head of the table, her silver hair pulled back in a practical bun, her dark eyes scanning each face as the cabinet members took their seats. She had been elected on a platform of peaceful coexistence with the Council, but everyone in this room knew the truth. Her entire administration had been preparing for the moment when peaceful coexistence would no longer be possible. That moment had arrived. Ambassador Vasquez's report confirms what our intelligence services have been warning us about for the past decade, the Prime Minister began without preamble. The Council has always viewed humanity as a temporary anomaly, a species to be exploited until it became inconvenient, then eliminated like the Draxori before us. Defense Minister Yuki Tanaka pulled up a series of holographic displays. Our analysis of Council fleet movements shows a coordinated buildup across 7 fronts. The Varathi have positioned their carrier groups near the Kepler systems. The Kethvari Ground Assault Corps has been training for urban combat in human gravity environments. The Luminari have been retrofitting their energy weapons to specifically target human physiology. They've been planning this for years, Admiral Chen added. Every diplomatic overture, every trade agreement, every supposedly generous technology exchange, it was all designed to keep us compliant while they prepared for the day they would no longer need us. The Prime Minister nodded slowly. Then it's time they learned the same was true for us. She touched a control on the table, and the displays shifted to show something that most of the cabinet had never seen, the true extent of humanity's preparations. Hidden shipyards in the asteroid belts of a dozen systems, secret research facilities operating in the gaps between charted space, training camps where soldiers were taught to fight in conditions that would kill any known Council species, weapon systems that had been developed in absolute secrecy, their existence known to only a handful of individuals in the entire coalition. The Council believes we are a species of 600 billion, the Prime Minister said. They believe our military capability is limited to the defense fleets they've been monitoring. They believe our technology is 2 generations behind theirs because that's what we've allowed them to see. She paused, allowing the implications to sink in. They're wrong, on all counts. Admiral Chen took over, pulling up a strategic overview of the galaxy. For the past century, we've been running what we call the Iceberg Protocol. Everything the Council has observed about humanity, our population, our military, our technology, represents roughly 15% of our actual capabilities. The other 85% has been hidden in systems they don't monitor, developed in facilities they don't know exist, and trained by instructors who have been preparing for exactly this scenario. Trade Minister Liu Wei shook his head slowly. I knew about the contingency preparations, but this, the scale of it. The scale was necessary, the Prime Minister replied. The Council's treaty structure was designed to prevent any species from threatening their collective dominance. They cap population growth through resource allocation. They limit military capability through defensive parameter requirements. They control technological development through safety regulations. We've been operating within those constraints for 2 centuries because we weren't ready to challenge them. And now we are? Asked Interior Minister Kowalski. Admiral Chen smiled, a cold expression that held no humor. Now we are. The display shifted to show fleet dispositions that dwarfed anything the Council had ever observed. Carriers the size of small moons, hidden in the dark spaces between stars. Automated defense platforms that had been seeded through every system humanity had ever visited. weapons that operated on principles the Council's Science Directorate had declared impossible. Our true fleet outnumbers the combined enforcement capacity of the Council by a factor of 3, the Admiral explained. Our soldiers have been training for multi-species combat for generations. Our scientists have reverse-engineered every piece of technology the Council has ever shared with us, improved upon it, and then developed countermeasures for it.
Ambassador Vasquez spoke for the first time since the briefing began. They gave us their knowledge because they believed we were too primitive to understand it. They thought they were throwing scraps to children. And instead, they were teaching the tiger to hunt, the Prime Minister concluded. The question before this cabinet is simple. Do we continue to play the role they've assigned us, or do we show them who we really are? The vote was unanimous. Part 3. The Response. Ambassador Elena Vasquez returned to the Grand Chamber of the Galactic Council exactly one standard rotation after she had left it. This time, she was not alone. Behind her stood Admiral William Chen in full dress uniform, medals gleaming on his chest. Flanking them were 12 Coalition Marines in powered armor that hummed with barely contained energy. And broadcasting through every communication channel in the galaxy was a signal that overrode all other transmissions. A signal that would ensure every being on every world would witness what happened next. The Council representatives shifted uneasily in their seats. This was not the demeanor of a species that had come to capitulate. Ambassador Vasquez, the Vorathi speaker, began, his voice carrying a note of warning. The presence of military personnel in this chamber is a violation of the Council's rules, Elena interrupted, her voice ringing through the chamber with an authority she had never before displayed. Yes, I'm aware. I'm also aware that the Council's rules were designed to ensure that species like humanity would never be in a position to challenge the established order. Those rules no longer apply to us. The Luminari delegate's form flickered with agitation. You would threaten the Council? You, whose species was crawling in mud when we had already mastered interstellar travel. The arrogance is entirely justified, Admiral Chen cut in. Allow me to demonstrate. He touched a control on his wrist, and the crystalline dome of the Grand Chamber suddenly displayed something other than the architect's crown. Instead, the Council representatives found themselves looking at a fleet of ships that had not existed in any of their databases, a fleet that dwarfed the enforcement forces they had spent decades assembling. What you're seeing is the first expeditionary fleet of the Terran Coalition, the Admiral explained calmly. It is currently holding position in the neutral zone, 3 hours from this station. Behind it are the 2nd through 8th expeditionary fleets distributed across the territories of every species represented in this chamber. The silence that followed was absolute. You will notice, Admiral Chen continued, that these vessels do not match any hull configurations in your recognition databases. That is because they were constructed in shipyards that your intelligence services never discovered, using technologies that your Science Directorate believes to be impossible. The smallest of them is capable of engaging an enforcement carrier group single-handedly. The largest— He paused, letting the image zoom in on a structure that looked less like a ship and more like a mobile planet. The largest is carrying enough firepower to reduce every inhabited world in the Council's territory to molten slag within a single rotation. The Kethvari representative rose on his coiled lower body, his voice trembling with what might have been fear or rage. You would not dare. The Council's response would be— Exactly what? Elena asked. The destruction of human space?
The extinction of our species? We've been operating under that threat for 2 centuries. We've watched you eliminate species after species. The Draxery, the Velmery, the countless others whose names have been erased from history. We know exactly what the Council does to those who refuse to submit.
She stepped forward, and even the massive Varathi speaker seemed to shrink back.
But here's what you never understood about humanity. We didn't come to the stars because we were ready for peace. We came because we survived billions of years of war, against our own planet, against each other, against every force that tried to drive us to extinction. By the time we left Earth, we had already faced apocalypse a dozen times over. We had already learned that the only guarantee of survival is strength that cannot be challenged.
You tricked us, the Luminary delegate hissed. Every treaty, every agreement. We protected ourselves, Elena corrected. We accepted your technology, and we improved it. We joined your peacekeeping fleets, and we studied your tactics. We provided researchers for your science directorate, and we learned everything you were willing to teach. Then we learned everything you tried to hide. She turned to address the full chamber, her voice carrying to every corner and, through the broadcast that was still running, to every world in the galaxy. For 2 centuries, humanity has been told that we are newcomers to the galactic community, that we should be grateful for the scraps we've been given, that our place is to serve, to labor, to provide whatever the Council demands. And we accepted that role because we were not yet ready to claim our true place. Her eyes swept across the Council representatives, taking in their shock, their fear, their dawning understanding of how thoroughly they had misjudged the species before them. We are ready now. Part 4. The War That Never Was. The next 72 hours reshaped the political landscape of the galaxy. The Varathi, whose military-industrial complex had been the backbone of the enforcement fleets for millennia, discovered that every major shipyard in their territory had been infiltrated by human intelligence operatives. Charges had been placed in critical structural points, ready to detonate at a signal that would never need to be sent. The message was clear. Any hostile action would result in the immediate destruction of their ability to wage war. The Luminari, whose energy-based physiology had always given them a sense of invulnerability, learned that human scientists had developed containment field disruptors that could destabilize their forms in seconds. The weapons had been seeded throughout the trade routes the Luminari controlled, hidden in navigation buoys and communication satellites that had been assumed to be of Luminari design. The Kethvari, whose ground forces were legendary for their ferocity, received reports from every garrison world that human special operations teams had already established positions. These teams carried weapons designed specifically to exploit Kethvari physiological vulnerabilities, weaknesses that had been carefully catalogued over decades of supposed cultural exchange. Similar revelations cascaded through every species on the Council. The humans had been everywhere, observing everything, preparing for a conflict that they had hoped would never come, but knew was inevitable. And in the Grand Chamber, the debate raged. "This is unprecedented," the Varathi speaker thundered. "No species has ever defied the Council in this manner." "The Draxori defied you," Elena replied calmly. "You destroyed them for it. The difference is that we are not the Draxori. We are not a species that can be isolated, contained, and eliminated. We are in your systems. We have been in your systems for generations. Any attempt to destroy humanity will result in the destruction of galactic civilization itself." "Mutually assured destruction," Admiral Chen added. a concept that your species never needed to develop, but that humanity perfected long before we ever left our homeworld. We have been living with the knowledge that we could destroy ourselves at any moment for 300 years. It has made us cautious. The Kethvari representative's voice was quiet, calculating. What do you want, then? If not war, what does humanity demand?
Elena had been waiting for this question. She had practiced the answer 1,000 times in her mind, knowing that everything humanity had built for 2 centuries came down to this moment. "We demand nothing," she said. "Demands imply that we need your permission. We do not. What we are offering is a choice." She gestured, and the displays shifted to show a map of the galaxy, but one unlike any the Council had seen before. Human territories were marked not as the small, contained zones the Council had permitted, but as the vast expanses that humanity had secretly colonized. Trade routes connected human systems to Council species not as tributaries to a greater whole, but as equal partners in exchange. Option 1. The Council continues as it has, with humanity as a full and equal member. We will share our technological advancements. We will open our hidden territories to trade. We will contribute to galactic security as partners rather than servants. In exchange, the population regulations and military limitations will be lifted for all species, not just humanity. The implication was clear. Humanity was offering liberation not just to itself, but to every species that had chafed under the Council's control. Option 2. The Council refuses, and we proceed to the war you have been preparing for. Our projections indicate that the conflict will last between 3 and 7 standard cycles. Casualty estimates exceed 4 trillion beings across all species. Multiple homeworlds will be rendered uninhabitable. The galactic economy will collapse. It will take millennia to rebuild, if rebuilding is even possible. She paused, letting the weight of those numbers settle over the chamber. Option 3. The Council disbands. Each species returns to governing its own affairs, with a new framework of bilateral agreements replacing the hierarchical structure that has existed for the past 10,000 years. Humanity is prepared to facilitate this transition and to ensure that no species exploits the chaos to prey upon another. The Luminari delegates' form rippled with confusion. You would see the Council destroyed? After all you have done to prepare for this confrontation, you would simply walk away? Elena shook her head. We would see the Council transformed. The structure you have built was designed to concentrate power in the hands of the oldest, most established species. It was designed to prevent change, to maintain a status quo that benefits you at the expense of everyone else. We have no interest in replacing your hegemony with our own. We have interest in creating something better. And if we choose option 2? The Vorathi speaker asked, his voice carrying a challenge. If we decide that humanity's destruction is worth the price you describe? Admiral Chen stepped forward, his expression unchanged. Then you will learn what 400 years of war against ourselves taught us about fighting. You will learn why we are still here when so many of our own civilizations rose and fell. And in the end, you will learn why the beings your ancestors enslaved and exploited whisper our name as a hope for deliverance. He met the Vorathi's compound eyes without flinching. We have been to the brink of extinction more times than you can imagine. Every time we found a way to survive. Every time we came back stronger. You are not the first threat humanity has faced, and you will not be the last.
But you can choose whether you want to be the threat that finally breaks us, or the opportunity that finally allows us to become what we were always meant to be." The silence stretched for what seemed like an eternity. Then, slowly, the Kethvari representative sank back into his coiled position. "We will need time to deliberate." "Take all the time you need," Elena replied. "But understand this, the ultimatum you gave us had a deadline. Ours does not. We are patient. We have been patient for 200 years. We can wait a few more days for you to make the right decision." She turned and walked toward the exit, Admiral Chen and the Marines falling into formation behind her. At the door, she paused and looked back at the assembled council. "When we first came to the stars, you saw us as children, primitive, emotional, driven by impulses that your ancient civilizations had long since evolved beyond. You were right, in a way. We are young. We are passionate. We do let our emotions guide us." Her smile held no warmth. "But you made one mistake. You assumed that our youth made us weak. You never considered that it might make us dangerous in ways you couldn't imagine. You never considered that a species that could hate with all its heart could also love with the same intensity. That a species capable of destroying itself 100 times over could also find the strength to stop at the edge of oblivion every single time." She opened the door. "You had 10,000 years to build your empire. We had 400 years to prepare for the moment you would try to take everything from us. Think carefully about what that says about who we really are." The door sealed behind her, and the council was left to contemplate the end of everything they had known. Part 5. The Reckoning. The deliberations lasted for 11 days. Throughout the galaxy, species that had accepted council rule for millennia suddenly found themselves reconsidering their positions. The broadcast of humanity's ultimatum had reached every world, every station, every ship. For the first time in recorded history, the Council's authority was being openly questioned. On Varathi Prime, massive protests erupted as citizens demanded to know why their government had provoked a species capable of ending their civilization. The Speaker's coalition government collapsed within the first week, replaced by moderates who promised a diplomatic resolution. In the gaseous depths of Luminara, the collective consciousness that governed their species fractured into factions for the first time in 3,000 years. Some demanded immediate war, willing to accept annihilation rather than submit to human demands. Others argued for negotiation, recognizing that humanity had offered something unprecedented, the chance to end the Council's stranglehold without becoming the new oppressor. The Kethvari, pragmatic as always, began quiet communications with human diplomatic channels. They were the first to recognize that the old order was already dead. The only question was what would replace it. Ambassador Elena Vazquez spent those 11 days in constant motion, meeting with representatives of every species willing to talk. She discovered something surprising. Beneath the surface of Council unity, there had always been resentment. Species that had been forced to accept subordinate positions for the sake of galactic stability. Cultures that had been stripped of their unique identities to conform to Council norms. Worlds that had been exploited for resources while being told they should be grateful for the privilege. Humanity had not been alone in its suffering. They had just been the first to do something about it. On the 8th day, she met with the Draxori. Everyone had believed them extinct, their homeworld sterilized, their colonies destroyed, their genetic legacy archived and forgotten. But some had survived, hidden in the margins of galactic society, passing as other species,
waiting for a moment that most of them had stopped believing would ever come.
Their representative was an elderly female named Cathara. Her scales faded to a dull gray, her eyes holding the weight of generations of secrecy and loss. "We watched your ultimatum," she said quietly. "We wept."
Elena nodded, understanding. The Council's crimes go back long before humanity ever left Earth. We want to make sure those crimes are never repeated.
"Can you promise that?" Cathara asked. "Can any species promise that they will not become what they replace?" It was a fair question, the fairest question Elena had ever been asked.
"No," she admitted, "we can't promise that. Humanity has committed atrocities of its own, against ourselves and against others. We are not saints. We are not saviors. We are a species that learned very early that the universe is not fair, that power corrupts, and that the only thing standing between civilization and chaos is the choice to be better."
She met the old Draxary's eyes.
"But we can promise this. We will try. Every day, every decision, we will try to be better than we were the day before. And when we fail, because we will face the consequences. We will not hide behind treaties designed to protect us from accountability. We will not pretend that our mistakes were really the fault of those we victimized."
Cathara was silent for a long moment. "That is more than the Council ever offered," she finally said. "Perhaps it will be enough." On the 11th day, the Council reconvened. The Grand Chamber was different now. Where 12 species had sat in judgment over humanity, now there were representatives from over 100 worlds, minor species who had demanded a voice in the decision that would shape the future of the galaxy. The Varathi speaker had been replaced by a moderate. The Luminari delegate had been recalled, and the Kethvari representative had openly declared his support for the third option.
Prime Minister Sarah Okonkwo had traveled to the Council station personally, accompanied by a delegation that included survivors of the Drexori, representatives of the minor species humanity had quietly been supporting for decades, and Admiral William Chen, whose fleet still waited in the neutral zone as a reminder of what would happen if the wrong choice was made.
The Council recognizes that its previous policies regarding the Terran coalition were misguided, the new Varathi speaker said, the words clearly causing him physical pain. "We further recognize that the structure of galactic governance requires fundamental reform to ensure the legitimate interests of all species are represented." It was as close to an admission of guilt as any Council species had ever made. Prime Minister Okonkwo rose to address the chamber. "The Terran Coalition accepts this recognition as a starting point for genuine dialogue. We propose the establishment of a new framework, not a council that imposes the will of the powerful upon the weak, but a genuine assembly where every species has an equal voice, where disputes are resolved through negotiation rather than intimidation, where the wealth of the galaxy is shared equitably rather than hoarded by those who happened to reach the stars first." She paused, looking out at the assembled delegates. "We know this will not be easy. Millennia of grievances cannot be resolved in days or months or even decades. There will be setbacks. There will be conflicts. There will be moments when the temptation to return to the old ways will seem overwhelming." Her voice hardened. "But we will resist that temptation, and we will expect everyone in this chamber to do the same. Because humanity did not spend 2 centuries preparing for this moment just to replace one tyranny with another. We did it because we have to believe, that something better is possible." Admiral Chen stood beside her, his presence a reminder that humanity's words were backed by force. Our fleet will remain on station until the new framework is established and functioning. This is not a threat, it is a guarantee. A guarantee that no species will exploit the transition to prey upon another. A guarantee that the reforms we are proposing will not be abandoned the moment our attention is elsewhere. He looked directly at the Vorathi delegation. And it is a guarantee that humanity will never again be vulnerable to the kind of ultimatum that brought us to this moment. We came to the stars hoping for peace. We spent 2 centuries preparing for war. Now we offer you the chance to help us build something that requires neither submission nor conquest. The new Vorathi speaker rose, his mandibles clicking in what the translation matrices rendered as reluctant agreement. The Council accepts the Terran Coalition's proposal. A working committee will be established to draft the new framework, with representatives from all interested species. The enforcement fleets will stand down pending the completion of negotiations. He paused, and when he spoke again, there was something almost like respect in his voice. Humanity has demonstrated capabilities that the Council failed to anticipate. We would be fools to continue underestimating you. Instead, we will work to ensure that your vision for the galaxy is realized, and that the mistakes of the past are not repeated. Prime Minister Okonkwo nodded. That's all we've ever asked. Part 6. The Long Road. The transformation of galactic society was not swift. The optimists had predicted years, the pessimists had predicted centuries. The reality fell somewhere in between. Within the first decade, the new Galactic Assembly had replaced the Council as the governing body of interstellar affairs. Every species, regardless of age or technological development, was granted equal representation. The old hierarchy was dismantled piece by piece, its structures of control and exploitation replaced by frameworks of cooperation and mutual benefit. But the process was not without conflict. The Luminary collective consciousness, having fractured during the crisis, never fully reunified. 3 separate factions emerged, each with its own vision of their species' future. 2 chose to integrate with the new order. The 3rd retreated to the deepest reaches of their gas giant homeworlds, refusing contact with any outside species. The galaxy learned to respect their isolation, just as it learned to welcome the contributions of those who chose to participate. The Kethvari became some of humanity's closest allies, a development that surprised no one who understood their pragmatic nature. Their military expertise, combined with human tactical innovations, formed the backbone of the new Galactic Security Force, an organization dedicated to preventing aggression rather than enforcing the will of the powerful. The Draxori emerged from hiding, their survival becoming a symbol of hope for species that had been marginalized under the old regime. Their expertise in genetic engineering, preserved through generations of secrecy, contributed to medical advances that benefited billions of beings across hundreds of worlds. And humanity. Humanity became something it had never been before. Throughout their history, humans had defined themselves in opposition to something, to nature, to each other, to the threats they perceived in the darkness between stars. The preparation for conflict with the Council had given them purpose, had driven their expansion and their development. Now, with that threat transformed into partnership, they had to find a new definition. Some struggled with the transition. Generations raised on the assumption that war was inevitable found peace disorienting. Military commanders who had trained their entire lives for a battle that never came struggled to find meaning in peacetime operations. Colonists who had built their lives in the hidden territories, always prepared to fight, had to learn how to simply live. But others thrived. The creativity that had been channeled into weapons development now flowed into art, into science, into exploration of frontiers that had nothing to do with territorial expansion. The discipline that had built secret fleets now built wonders that would have seemed impossible to previous generations. Habitats in the hearts of stars, networks of communication that spanned galaxies, collaborations with species that had been enemies mere decades before. Elena Vasquez, who had stood alone in the Grand Chamber and delivered the ultimatum that changed everything, lived long enough to see the transformation begin, but not long enough to see it completed. She died at the age of 127, surrounded by her family and by representatives of 37 species who had come to pay their respects to the woman who had helped birth a new era. Her final words became famous throughout the galaxy. "We proved them wrong," she said softly, her eyes focused on something only she could see. "We proved everyone wrong. They said we were too young, too violent, too unpredictable. They said we would destroy ourselves before we ever amounted to anything. But we're still here. We're still learning. We're still becoming." Her daughter held her hand as her breathing slowed. "And we always will be." 3 centuries after the ultimatum, a young human named David Chen, descended from both Admiral William Chen and Ambassador Elena Vasquez, stood before the Galactic Assembly as the newly elected High Coordinator. The position was largely ceremonial. The Assembly governed through consensus, and no single individual held the kind of power that the old Council had wielded. But it was still an honor, the first time a human had been chosen to represent the collective voice of galactic civilization. David looked out at the delegates from over 500 species, their forms ranging from vaguely humanoid to utterly alien. Among them sat representatives of the Varathi, the Luminari factions that had chosen integration, the Kethvari, the Draxori, and hundreds of others whose names his great-grandparents would never have recognized. They were watching him, these beings whose ancestors had nearly destroyed everything he loved. And he smiled. "300 years ago," he began, "my great-grandmother stood in this chamber, when it was a different chamber, serving a different purpose, and told the Council that humanity was ready to claim its place among the stars. She spoke of strength, of power, of the preparations we had made to defend ourselves against those who would see us extinct." He paused, letting his gaze sweep across the assembly. "Today, I stand before you not to speak of war, but of peace, not of defense, but of collaboration, not of the species we were forced to become, but of the species we have chosen to be." He thought of Elena, whose courage had made this moment possible, of William, whose strategic genius had given humanity the leverage it needed, of the countless billions who had worked in secret, building the hidden infrastructure that had saved their civilization. And he thought of the billions more who had come after, who had taken the peace their ancestors had won and transformed it into something beautiful. Humanity came to the stars carrying the weight of our own history, a history of violence, of conquest, of the terrible things that beings do to one another in the name of survival. We were told that this history made us unsuitable for galactic civilization, that we were too young, too dangerous, too unpredictable to be trusted. He shook his head slowly. Our ancestors proved that humanity could be dangerous. They showed the galaxy that we were capable of matching any threat, of building weapons that could end civilizations, of planning for war with a patience and dedication that surprised everyone who had underestimated us. His voice softened. But they also proved something else. They proved that we could choose not to use those weapons, that we could offer peace instead of demanding conquest, that we could seek partners instead of subjects.
He spread his hands, encompassing the entire assembly.
Look at what we have built together. 500 species, working in cooperation. Diseases that once ravaged entire populations, cured through shared research. Famines that would have killed billions, prevented through equitable distribution. Conflicts that would have torn the galaxy apart, resolved through dialogue rather than destruction.
His voice rose, carrying through the chamber and through the broadcasts that would reach every world in the network. This is humanity's legacy. Not the fleets we built, not the weapons we designed, not the preparations we made for a war we hoped would never come. Our legacy is the choice we made when the moment arrived. The choice to offer transformation instead of annihilation. The choice to trust that beings who had been our enemies could become our partners. He looked directly into the recording drones, knowing his words would reach every human who had ever wondered what their species' purpose was in the vast emptiness of space. We were asked to surrender. We refused. We were threatened with extinction. We revealed our strength. And then, when we had the power to impose our will on the entire galaxy, we chose a different path.
David Chen smiled, and in that smile was the weight of centuries, the tears and blood of his ancestors, the sacrifices they had made, the hopes they had carried. That is what it means to be human. That is what it has always meant. We face the darkness, we prepare for the worst, and then, when the moment comes, we choose to be better than we have any right to be.
He raised his hand in the traditional salute of the assembly.
To all beings who share this galaxy with us, we are honored by your trust. We will work to be worthy of it, and we will never stop trying to become the species we know we can be. The assembly rose, delegates of 500 species standing in recognition of a truth that had taken 3 centuries to prove. Humanity had been threatened. Humanity had not negotiated. And in the end, humanity had won, not through destruction, but through the most human victory of all. They had chosen hope over fear, and the galaxy had followed. Epilogue: The Message. 10,000 years after the ultimatum, a research vessel exploring the outermost reaches of known space discovered something unexpected. The ship, crewed by beings who would have been unrecognizable to the humans of Elena Vasquez's time, beings whose genetic heritage included a dozen species, whose minds were networked into the vast consciousness of galactic civilization, whose bodies had been optimized for environments that would have killed their ancestors in seconds, was investigating an anomaly detected by long-range sensors. What they found was a probe, ancient, battered by millennia of cosmic radiation, but still broadcasting a signal that had been traveling through space since before any of them had been born. The message was simple, recorded in a language that had to be translated by historians who specialized in dead tongues. To whoever receives this transmission, we are humanity. We come from a small world orbiting an unremarkable star on the outer edge of an ordinary galaxy. We have just begun to explore the universe, and we do not know what we will find. Perhaps there is no one out there. Perhaps we are alone. Or perhaps there are others, beings who have been traveling the stars for longer than our species has existed. If you are receiving this, then you are proof that we are not alone. We hope that you are friendly. We hope that you are curious. We hope that you want to learn from us as much as we want to learn from you. The recording paused, and when it resumed, the voice was different, older, wiser, carrying the weight of experience that the first speaker had not yet acquired. This is humanity. 100 years after the first message. We have encountered other species. Some have been friendly, Others have seen us as prey, as servants, as nuisances to be eliminated. We have survived. We will continue to survive. But we have not forgotten the hope that drove us to send this message in the first place. If you are out there, if you are watching us grow and struggle and occasionally fall, we hope you understand. We are trying. We are always trying. Another pause. Another voice. This is humanity, 500 years after the first message. We have faced threats that would have destroyed lesser species. We have built wonders that our ancestors could never have imagined. And we have learned the hardest lesson of all, that the universe does not care about our hopes or our fears. It simply is. But we care. We care about each other, about the species we have met, about the possibilities that stretch out before us like an endless road. This is our promise. Wherever you are, whoever you are, we will meet you as equals. We will not conquer you. We will not submit to you. We will learn from you, and we will share what we have learned in return. The message continued, layer upon layer of recordings added across millennia, voices of hope, of despair, of triumph, of mourning. Each one carried the same essential truth, that humanity, for all its flaws, had never stopped reaching towards something better. The final recording was the most recent, added just a few hundred years before the research vessel discovered the probe. This is humanity, at the dawn of a new era. We have traveled to the edges of the galaxy and back. We have joined with species that were once our enemies to build a civilization that spans the stars. We have made mistakes, terrible mistakes that cost trillions of lives. But we have also made choices that saved billions more. The voice paused, and when it continued, there was something almost like laughter in it. We still don't know if anyone is out there, listening to these messages we keep sending. Maybe this probe will drift through empty space forever, never heard by any being. Maybe it will be found by someone who looks at our story and wonders what kind of species could be so foolish, so stubborn, so irrationally hopeful. The laughter faded, replaced by something deeper. But here is what we know. Hope is not irrational. It is the most rational thing in the universe. Because without hope, there is no reason to try. Without hope, there is no reason to build, to explore, to reach out across the endless void. The universe is vast and cold and utterly indifferent to our existence. But we are not indifferent to each other. We never have been. The message ended with a phrase that had become the unofficial motto of humanity's expansion through the stars. A phrase that had been spoken by Elena Vasquez in the Grand Chamber 10,000 years ago. That had been repeated by David Chen when he addressed the assembly, that had been carried by every human who had ever looked up at the night sky and wondered what lay beyond. We will not stop. We will not give up. We will not abandon the hope that brought us to the stars in the first place. The crew of the research vessel sat in silence, listening to the echo of their ancestors' voices. Then, as one, they transmitted their own message back toward the core worlds of civilization. A message that would take centuries to arrive, but that would be waiting when it did. This is the exploration vessel Unity, the message began. We have found the first Hope probe launched from Earth 10,000 years ago. Its message has been received, and we respond in the spirit in which it was sent. The crew looked at each other, beings whose forms would have been unrecognizable to those first hopeful explorers, but whose hearts beat with the same stubborn determination. We are still here. We are still trying, and we will never stop reaching toward the stars. The message ended, but the journey continued. It always would. The end.